They sold me on a Tuesday. No ceremony, no announcement, just my alpha's voice cutting through the morning cold like a blade I should have seen coming. 60 silvers, that's the final offer. I stood in the courtyard with my wrists bound in front of me, barefoot on frozen stone, while my pack alpha bartered my body to a stranger like I was livestock with a limp. 60 silvers, that was my value, my entire existence reduced to a number that wouldn't even cover a season's worth of grain. The buyer, a thick-necked beta with scars across his jaw, looked me over the way you'd inspect a horse with a bad leg. He grabbed my chin, turned my face left, then right, pressed his thumb against my pulse like he was checking whether I was even alive. She doesn't shift. Barely, my alpha said. Partial at best, wolf stunted, omega rank, bottom tier. But she's young, healthy enough for labor or whatever you need. Whatever you need. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't feel anything at all actually, and that was the worst part. Not the selling, not the rough hands, the fact that I'd known this was coming for so long that when it finally happened, my body didn't even bother to react. My name is Amy, and I'd been nothing for as long as I could remember. The convoy left before noon. 3 caged wagons, 8 guards, a handful of other trades, 2 omegas from a border pack, a feral they kept muzzled in the back wagon. I was placed in the middle cart. No chains because I wasn't considered dangerous enough to chain. No guard assigned to me because I wasn't considered valuable enough to guard. I sat on the wooden floor with my knees drawn up to my chest and watched the trees blur past through the iron bars. Somewhere behind me, something whimpered. I turned. In the corner of the wagon, pressed against a crate of supplies, was the smallest wolf I'd ever seen. Half-shifted, stuck somewhere between boy and beast, patchy fur along his spine, one ear pointed and the other still rounded and human. His eyes were too big for his face. His ribs pressed against his skin like they were trying to escape. A runt. The guards had thrown him in with the cargo, not even with the other trades. He wasn't product, he was barely alive. He looked at me with those enormous amber eyes, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. I didn't speak. I just shifted my body slightly, just enough to block the wind that was cutting through the bars on his side of the cart. He blinked, then he crawled slowly, painfully, until he was pressed against my leg. His body was burning hot fever. He was sick and no one had noticed or no one had cared. I put my hand on his head. His fur was coarse and patchy under my palm. He exhaled, a long shuddering breath, and his shaking slowed. "You're okay," I whispered. It was the first time I'd spoken in 3 days. No one fed him. I figured that out on the second day when the guards tossed stale bread and dried meat through the bars for me and nothing for the pup. He stared at the food with a hunger that made my stomach clench. I broke my bread in half and held it out to him. He didn't take it, just looked at it, then looked at me, confused, like he didn't understand the gesture. "Take it," I said. He sniffed it once, then he ate so fast he choked, and I had to rub his throat to get the bread down. After that, he didn't leave my side, not once. When the cart jolted, he pressed closer. When a guard banged on the bars to shut up the feral in the back wagon, the pup flinched and buried his face against my ribs. When night came and the cold turned sharp enough to cut, he curled into a ball against my stomach, and I wrapped my arms around him because it was the only warmth either of us had. I didn't name him. I'd learned a long time ago not to name things I would lose. On the 3rd morning, the beta with the scarred jaw came to check on inventory. He looked at the pup tucked against me and laughed. The defect found himself a pet fitting. His guards laughed too. He reached through the bars and grabbed the pup by the scruff. The pup yelped, a high broken sound, and I moved before I could think. I grabbed the beta's wrist. The whole convoy went quiet. He stared at me. I stared at him. My hand was shaking, his wasn't. "Let go," he said. His voice was flat, dead calm, the way men sound right before they hurt you. I let go. He shoved the pup back into the cage so hard the little body hit the opposite wall. Then he looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his boot. "Touch me again, defect, and I'll skin the mud in front of you." He walked away. The convoy moved on. The pup limped back to me, one leg dragging. I checked it. Not broken, but badly bruised. He licked my fingers while I examined him, his tail twitching weakly. Something cracked inside my chest. Not warmth, not hope, something older, something I didn't have a name for, something that said, "This one, this small, broken, unwanted thing, this one I won't let go of." The attack came at dusk on the 4th day. We were passing through a narrow valley, high cliff walls on either side, thick forest ahead and behind, the kind of terrain that screamed ambush to anyone paying attention. No one was paying attention. The first arrow hit the lead guard in the throat. He dropped from his horse without a sound. Then the world exploded. Wolves poured from the tree line, not half-shifted runts or border strays, full-shifted, battle-scarred, enormous wolves with eyes that reflected the dying light like molten silver. They moved in perfect formation, silent, fast, lethal. The guards scrambled, swords out, shields up, shouting over each other, giving contradictory orders, falling apart in real time. 3 more guards went down in the first 10 seconds. The beta with the scarred jaw, the buyer, the one who'd paid 60 silvers for me, ran, didn't fight, didn't stand, just threw himself onto the nearest horse and bolted down the trail without looking back. The remaining guards followed, every single one of them. They left the wagons, left the cargo, left us. The feral in the back wagon was thrashing against his muzzle, slamming his body into the bars. The other Omegas were screaming. I wasn't screaming. I was watching. One of the attacking wolves, massive, black-furred with a torn ear, smashed the lock on the back wagon with his jaw. The feral bolted into the woods. 2 more wolves ripped open the second cart, and the Omegas scrambled out, running blindly into the trees. Nobody came to my wagon. I heard a wolf pass by, heavy paws on packed dirt, and then keep going, chasing the guards, chasing the horses, chasing anything worth chasing. I wasn't worth chasing. An arrow had come through the bars during the first volley and caught me across the ribs. Not deep enough to kill fast, deep enough to bleed. I pressed my hand to the wound and felt warmth spreading through my fingers in slow, steady pulses. The pup was pressed against me, trembling, his claws digging into my thigh. He was making a sound, not a whimper, not a growl, something in between, something desperate. The world was getting quieter. The fighting had moved down the trail, the screaming had stopped. Smoke drifted through the valley from the overturned supply wagon someone had set ablaze. I leaned my head back against and closed my eyes. This is it then. Not surprising, not dramatic, just expected. The defective Omega bleeding out in an abandoned cage on a road nobody would remember, in a story nobody would tell. I was so tired of being nothing, tired of fighting to survive inside a life that didn't want me in it. My hand slipped from my wound. Blood pooled beneath me, black in the fading light. The pup whined and licked my face, my jaw, my closed eyes. He nudged my hand with his nose, trying to push it back to the wound like he understood. I couldn't move. He pressed his body against the wound instead, his small, bony, fevered body trying to be a bandage, trying to hold me together with nothing but proximity and will. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I just breathed. And then the pup did something I didn't expect. He stood up, on shaking legs with his bruised paw barely holding weight. He turned to face the open end of the wagon. He planted himself between me and the darkness, and he growled. It was the weakest sound I'd ever heard, a raspy, crackling vibration from a throat too small and too sick to produce anything that mattered. But he held it. He held that growl like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I woke up in a room I didn't recognize, in a bed that was too soft. I arrived at the wreckage 20 minutes after my scouts reported the convoy's route. The attack hadn't been mine. A rival pack, the Ashbourne, running a territory raid that had gotten sloppy. They'd already pulled back by the time I reached the valley, took what they wanted and left the rest to rot. Typical. I walked through the carnage with 2 of my enforcers at my back. Broken wagons, dead horses, bodies that didn't interest me. Nothing worth salvaging, Alpha, Taryn said from my left. I didn't respond. Something was pulling at me, a scent. Not blood, not smoke, something underneath both. Something faint and wrong and alive in a place where nothing should have been. I followed it. The middle wagon was still mostly intact. Cage bars, wooden floor, a dark interior that smelled like iron and wet fur, and there in the center of the cage was the most absurd thing I'd ever seen in 12 years of warfare. A wolf pup, barely shifted, barely standing, ribs visible through patchy fur, was planted over a body. A girl. Omega, based on scent, bleeding badly, barely breathing. The pup saw me and growled at me. A creature the size of my forearm was growling at the alpha of the Iron Maw pack. At a wolf who had torn throats in 3 territory wars, who commanded 400 soldiers, who had not lost a single battle since he was 19 years old. This pathetic, trembling, half-dead runt was growling at me. Want me to? Taryn started. No. I stepped closer. The pup's growl intensified, or tried to. The sound cracked halfway through, his body swaying. He was going to collapse. He was burning with fever and standing on a leg that clearly couldn't bear weight. But he didn't move. He didn't run, he didn't cower. He didn't bare his throat in submission the way every wolf under my rank was supposed to. He just stood there. Shaking, growling, dying on his feet over a girl who might already be dead. I crouched in front of the cage. The pup snapped at me, missed by 6 in, his jaws barely had the strength to close. Behind him, the girl's eyes opened, just barely. Slits of dark brown, unfocused, glazed with pain. She looked at me, not with fear, not with hope, with nothing. Like she was looking at the last thing she'd ever see and couldn't be bothered to care what it was. Then her gaze shifted down to the pup, and something changed. Her hand moved, slow, shaking. She reached for the pup, not to pull him back, not to use him as a shield. She put her hand on his side and pressed gently, trying to steady him. She was dying, and her last act was trying to comfort the thing standing over her. Not begging, not bargaining, not reaching for me, the one with the power. Reaching for the one with nothing. I'd seen 1,000 acts of desperation. Wolves who'd sell their packmates for another breath. Wolves who'd grovel, betray, manipulate, beg, anything to survive. I'd never seen this. Terran Alpha, get the healer now. I woke up in a room I didn't recognize, in a bed that was too soft, wearing bandages that someone else had put on me. Panic came first. The blind animal kind that doesn't think, it just moves. I sat up and my ribs screamed and my vision went white and I almost blacked out again. A hand pushed me back down. Not rough, not gentle either. Efficient. If you tear those stitches, I won't redo them. A woman. Old, sharp face, sharper voice. She was measuring herbs at a table near the window, not even looking at me. The pup, I rasped. Where? The mongrel is alive, barely. He's in the next room with a fever that should have killed him 2 days ago, but didn't, because apparently stubbornness is a medical treatment now. I exhaled. My whole body went slack. Where am I? Iron Maw territory, the Alpha's compound. You've been unconscious for a day and a half. She glanced at me over her shoulder. You're Omega, not a question. Yes, defective. Yes. She studied me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she turned back to her herbs. You'll live. Whether that's a good thing remains to be seen. I didn't see the Alpha for 3 days. I saw his compound, though, or what I could see from the small window in the healer's quarters. Stone walls, patrolling wolves, training yards where warriors sparred with a brutality that made my old pack look like children playing pretend. The Iron Maw pack. Even in my old pack, small, weak, irrelevant, we'd heard the name. A pack built on military precision. No alliances, no treaties. A pack that took territory the way storms take trees without asking. And their Alpha Alaric. The stories about him were the kind parents used to scare pups into obedience. Cold, ruthless. A wolf who'd executed his own uncle for treason at 17. A wolf who didn't negotiate because he didn't need to. I was in his territory, in his compound, in his debt, and I had no idea why. The healer, her name was Joyce, let me see the pup on the second day. He was lying on a pile of rags in the supply room next to hers, too weak to stand, but conscious. When I knelt beside him, his tail twitched once. I put my hand on his head. His fever had dropped, but not broken. His breathing was shallow and fast. The Alpha's healer gave him medicine, Joyce said from the doorway. Cost more than you're worth, probably. More than either of you are worth. I didn't respond. I just kept my hand on the pup's head and matched my breathing to his until his slowed. What's his name? Joyce asked. He doesn't have one? Everything has a name. I looked at the pup, at his patchy fur and his 2 big eyes and his one ear that flopped sideways, at the small, broken, unwanted thing that had stood over me when everyone else ran. Nix, I said. I didn't know where the name came from. It was just there like it had been waiting. Joyce snorted. Dramatic. Fitting. On the 3rd day, Alaric came. I knew it was him before he entered the room. The air changed. The healer's quarters, which had been humming with Joyce's low grumbling and the clink of mortar and pestle, went completely, unnervingly still. The door opened. He was taller than I remembered, broader. Dark hair cut short, jaw hard enough to look carved from the same stone as his compound walls. Eyes that were gray, not silver, not blue. Gray like smoke, like something that had burned away everything soft and left only ash. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me in the cage. Not with hunger, not with pity, with something I couldn't name, something that sat between curiosity and calculation. Stand, he said. My body obeyed before my brain caught up. I was on my feet with my ribs screaming and my legs shaking, because when an Alpha like this one gives a command, your body doesn't ask your opinion first. He studied me up and down, not the way the beta buyer had, not assessing my body for use. He was looking at something else, something I couldn't see. You're Omega. Yes, defective. Yes, you can't fully shift. No, you were sold by your pack. Yes, for 60 silvers. The number still didn't hurt, it should have hurt. Yes, your pack. Red Hollow. Yes, a weak pack, bottom tier, border territory they can barely hold. He said it like he was reading from a file. No emotion, just data. Yes, he stepped closer, not threatening, but close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him, the weight of his presence like a physical thing pressing against my chest. You grabbed the convoy leader's arm. My heart stopped. My scouts were watching the convoy for 2 days before the Ashbourne attack. Standard reconnaissance. They reported that a bound Omega with no wolf grabbed a beta twice her size because he was handling a runt. I said nothing. Why? It wasn't a question. It was a demand. He was hurting him, I said. The pup. The pup is worthless, a runt. He'll never shift fully, never fight, never breed strong offspring. He was hurting him, I said again. Alaric's jaw tightened. Something shifted behind those gray eyes, something fast there and gone. The pup stayed, he said, when the attack happened. The scouts reported that every wolf in that convoy ran, guards, buyers, cargo, even the feral, but the runt stayed over you. Yes. Why? I don't know. Guess, I swallowed. My throat was dry and my ribs ached, and this man was terrifying in a way that went beyond physical. He was terrifying because nothing about him was readable. No anger, no kindness, no agenda I could see. Because, I said, nobody ever told him he was supposed to leave. The silence that followed lasted 5 seconds. It felt like 5 hours. Alaric looked at me. Then he looked at the door behind him, toward the supply room where Nyx was lying on his pile of rags. Then he turned and walked out without another word. I expected to be discarded, sold again, maybe, traded to another pack for something useful, given to the soldiers as labor, or left at the border to fend for myself. None of that happened. Instead, Joyce told me I was being placed temporary quarters in the lower east wing of the compound. Small, austere, a cot and a wash basin and a window that faced yard. Not a cell. Not comfortable either. Somewhere in between. Nyx came with me. His fever broke on the 4th day, and he ate solid food, a strip of rabbit meat Joyce grudgingly provided. And by the 5th day, he was limping around the room, sniffing everything, his one floppy ear swiveling toward every sound. No one told me what I was supposed to do. No one came to assign me tasks or explain my role. The door wasn't locked. Food appeared twice a day, plain, but enough. A guard walked past my corridor once an hour, but never stopped. I existed in this space like a held breath, present, but unexplained. The other wolves noticed. The Iron Maw compound wasn't like Red Hollow. Red Hollow had been a loose collection of families sharing territory out of necessity, governed by a weak alpha who maintained power through alliances he couldn't enforce. Iron Maw was a machine. Everything had structure. Hierarchy wasn't just social, it was architectural. The alpha's quarters occupied the top level, officers and senior wolves on the 2nd, ranked warriors on the 3rd, everyone else below that in descending order of usefulness. I was on the lowest floor, but even that was apparently a controversy. I noticed the stairs on my 2nd day out of the healer's quarters. Wolves in the corridors, in the courtyard, at the communal dining hall, where I sat alone at the end of the farthest table, with Nyx curled under my bench. They watched me the way you watch something that doesn't belong. Not with hostility, not yet, with confusion, like I was a word in a language they didn't speak. An Omega, defective, unsold, unclaimed. Occupying space in the most elite pack compound in 4 territories. None of them spoke to me. That was fine. I was used to silence. I'd been living in it my whole life. I saw Alaric twice in the 1st week, both times from a distance. Once in the training yard, sparring with his 2nd, a massive red-haired wolf named Terran, who I'd learn later was the same enforcer who'd been with him at the wreckage. They moved with a violence that should have been terrifying, but was somehow hypnotic, precise, controlled. Every strike calibrated, every dodge earned. Alaric won in under 3 minutes. He barely looked winded. The 2nd time was in the dining hall. He entered from the upper corridor, flanked by 2 officers, and every wolf in the room went quiet. Not tense, just still, the way air goes still before a storm. Not out of fear, but awareness. He scanned the room. His eyes passed over 200 wolves and landed on me for exactly 1 second. Then he looked away and continued to the officer's table. 1 second. That's all it was. But my heart hammered for 10 minutes after. On the 8th day, someone finally spoke to me. You're the defect. I was in the courtyard. Nyx was at my feet chewing on a stick he'd found. The voice came from behind me, female, smooth, carrying the kind of casual cruelty that some people wear like perfume. I turned. She was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that felt intentional. Everything about her arranged for maximum impact. Tall, lean, dark curls spilling over one shoulder, amber eyes that glowed faintly even in daylight. She wore the training leathers of a ranked warrior and carried herself like someone who'd never been told no. 2 other females flanked her, both ranked, both watching me the way their leader was with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. I'm Rose, she said, beta ranked, the alphas, she paused, lips curving. Well, the alpha's closest advisor. The emphasis on closest wasn't subtle. I said nothing. You don't speak. I speak. But not to me. She tilted her head. You know, there's been a lot of talk about you, the Omega from the wreckage, the broken one the alpha dragged home. She stepped closer. People are confused. They don't understand why you're here. I kept my face still, my body still. I'd had a lifetime of practice at being still when someone was trying to make me flinch. Neither do I said. She laughed. It was a bright, sharp sound like glass breaking. At least she's honest. She looked down at Nyx. And this is the mutt? Nyx stopped chewing his stick. His amber eyes locked on Rose with an intensity that looked strange on something so small. He growled at the alpha, Rose said. Everyone's heard the story, the runt who growled at Alaric. She crouched, reaching for Nyx. Let me see if he's as brave as Nyx growled. It was still small, still crackling and thin, but it was immediate and unwavering and aimed directly at her outstretched hand. Rose pulled back, her eyes hardened. Interesting. She stood, smoothing her leathers like the encounter hadn't mattered. Enjoy your stay, defect, however long it lasts. She walked away, her flankers followed. Nyx's growl faded. He went back to his stick. I knelt beside him and ran my hand over his patchy head. You need to stop growling at people who can kill you. His tail twitched. I was reviewing territory maps in my study when Terran interrupted me. The Omega, I didn't look up. What about her? Rose is already circling. Rose circles everything. Alaric. He said my name without the title, which meant he was being Terran my second, not Terran my enforcer. He only did that when he thought I was making a mistake. You brought an unclaimed, defective Omega into a pack that values strength above everything else. You put her in the compound. You had Joyce treat her and the runt. You haven't explained why to anyone, including me. I don't owe explanations. No, but you owe strategy, and right now the entire pack is watching you to see what this girl is. A pet project? A charity case? He paused. A claim? I looked up. Choose your next words carefully, Taryn. He held my gaze. He was one of the only wolves alive who could do that for more than 2 seconds. I'm not questioning you. I'm telling you what your pack is thinking. And what your pack is thinking will become what your pack does. You know that. I turned back to the maps. The truth, the thing I hadn't told Taryn, hadn't told anyone, hadn't fully told myself, was that I didn't know why I'd brought her here. I'd seen dying Omegas before. I'd seen runts before. I'd walked through 100 battlefields and stepped over 1,000 bodies and felt nothing except the cold arithmetic of war. Lives lost, resources gained, territory won. But that image, that girl, that pup, that growl, it had lodged somewhere in my chest like an arrowhead I couldn't extract. Not because it was beautiful, it wasn't. It was stupid and pointless and weak. A dying girl and a dying runt achieving absolutely nothing against an army. But the pup hadn't calculated. He hadn't weighed his odds. He hadn't made a strategic decision to stay. He just stayed, and she'd reached for him, not for me, not for power, not for survival, for him in a world where every wolf I'd ever known run a constant internal ledger of advantage and cost. Those two broken things had operated on a logic I didn't recognize, and I wanted to understand it. That was all. That was the reason. I wanted to understand. Leave her where she is, I told Taryn. She stays. For how long? Until I say otherwise. Weeks passed. I found a rhythm, not comfort. Rhythms and comfort are different things. Comfort is safety. Rhythm is just the shape your survival takes when nobody's actively trying to kill you. I ate in the dining hall, alone, always at the end of the far table, Nix under the bench eating scraps I saved for him. The other wolves gave me a wide berth, not out of respect, out of uncertainty. I was an anomaly, and anomalies in a pack like Iron Maw were treated with the same caution as unexploded munitions. Joyce let me help in the healer's quarters. Small tasks, grinding herbs, cleaning tools, organizing supplies. She didn't thank me, and she didn't teach me, and she didn't pretend I was welcome, but she didn't send me away. You're quiet, she said once. I like quiet. That was the closest to approval I'd ever received from anyone. Nix grew stronger. Not bigger, he would never be big, but stronger. His fever faded entirely. His limp became a slight hitch, then barely noticeable. He followed me everywhere, corridor to dining hall to healer's quarters back to our room. His shadow and mine merged into one. He still couldn't fully shift. The patchy fur, the one flopped ear, the two big eyes, all permanent. A runt forever. But he was alive, and he was mine, and I was his. And in a compound of 400 wolves, that small, mutual, irrational loyalty was the only thing that felt real. The first time I spoke to Alaric again, it was an accident. I was in the corridor outside the healer's quarters, carrying a basket of dried herbs. Nix was trotting beside me. I turned a corner and walked directly into a wall. The wall was Alaric. The basket went everywhere. Herbs scattered across the stone floor like confetti at the worst party in history. Nix yelped and skittered backward. I dropped to my knees immediately, not in submission, in practicality, grabbing herbs off the floor before they got crushed underfoot. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't see. You walked into me. Yes, I'm sorry. I kept grabbing herbs. My hands were shaking. I could feel him standing over me, not moving, not helping, not leaving, just standing there while I crawled at his feet collecting scattered plants. Then a boot appeared in my field of vision. His boot pushing a sprig of dried vervain toward my hand. I stopped, stared at the vervain, stared at the boot, looked up. Alaric was watching me with that same unreadable expression, but his foot had pushed the herb toward me, a movement so small it barely qualified as a gesture. Joyce will take it out of your rations if you lose her inventory, he said. She would, I managed. The corner of his mouth didn't quite move, but something in his expression shifted. The faintest atmospheric change, like a cloud passing across the sun. He stepped around me and continued down the corridor. His enforcers followed. I sat on the floor with my basket of herbs and my pounding heart and thought. He pushed the vervain toward me. It was nothing. It meant nothing. But I held onto it anyway, the way you hold onto a match in the dark. Not because it gives you enough light, because it proves light exists. The first time I defied an order, it was 3 weeks in. A ranked warrior, mid-tier, thick arms, flat eyes, cornered me in the courtyard. His name was Bren, and he'd apparently decided that an unclaimed Omega was communal property. Fetch my gear from the armory, he said. Not asking, telling. I don't serve your rank, I said. It came out before I could stop it. A sentence so quiet and so flat that it barely qualified as resistance. But in a pack like Iron Maw, where hierarchy was law and Omegas were dust, it was the equivalent of throwing a punch. Bren's eyes went hard. What did you just say? My blood was ice. My throat was tight. Every instinct I had, every lesson beaten into me over 18 years of being nothing, screamed at me to lower my highs, bare my throat, comply. Nyx pressed against my ankle, warm, steady. I said I don't serve your rank, I repeated, louder this time, barely. Bren grabbed my arm. His grip was crushing, fingers digging into muscle, and I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. You don't have a rank defect. You don't have a wolf. You don't have a pack. You're here because the alpha had a moment of weakness, and when that moment passes, Bren. The voice came from the upper walkway. Alaric, he wasn't looking at us. He was leaning against the stone railing, arms crossed, watching the training yard below like he just happened to be there, like he hadn't been watching. Release her. 2 words, no raised voice, no threat, just a statement of fact dressed as a command. Bren's hand opened. He stepped back, looked up at the walkway, then at me, then at the walkway again. Alpha, I was just you were leaving. Bren left. I stood in the courtyard with my arm throbbing and my pulse racing and looked up at the walkway. Alaric was already gone. That night, I lay on my cot with Nyx curled against my stomach and stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what was happening to me. I'd been invisible my entire life. At Red Hollow, I'd perfected the art of non-existence. Don't speak, don't want, don't need, don't take up space. Invisible things don't get hurt. Invisible things don't get sold. Except I had been sold. Because even invisibility wasn't enough to save me. Even being nothing wasn't enough. And now I was here, in a compound that valued strength, under the attention of an alpha who valued even less. And he'd pushed a sprig of vervain toward me with his boot, and he'd said release her from a walkway he just happened to be standing on. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't trust what it might mean. Hope was a weapon that other people aimed at you, and I'd been shot with enough times to know that the wound it left was worse than anything physical. But I thought about his gray eyes, the way they watched, not with heat, not with coldness, with something between. And I pressed my face against Nyx's patchy fur and breathed. Rose came for me on a Thursday, not physically. Rose was too smart for that. She came the way fire comes, from a distance, spreading before you see the source. It started with whispers. She's here because she's warming his bed. Defective Omega, no wolf, no rank. What else would she be for? The alpha doesn't keep charity. She must be serving some purpose. The insinuations seeped through the compound like poison through water. I heard them in the dining hall, voices dropping to murmurs when I passed, rising again behind me. I felt them in the way other wolves looked at me. The confusion had curdled into something sharper. Contempt. Joyce told me on the 5th week, Rose is telling the ranked females you're the alpha's whore. I was grinding herbs. My hands didn't stop. I'm not. I know that, you know that, the alpha knows that. Rose knows it too, which is why it's so effective. Joyce's voice was dry as bone. Truth doesn't travel as fast as a good lie. What do? Nothing. You do nothing because there's nothing to do. You have no rank, no wolf, no allies. Rose is beta ranked with 3 generations of lineage in this pack. You're a 60 silver Omega with a mutt. She paused. Some battles can't be won. I kept grinding. Nyx lying near the hearth watched me with his big amber eyes. Some battles can't be won. She was right. But something had shifted in me, something small and quiet and stubborn. That old cracked thing in my chest that had opened when the pup pressed himself against my wound. I wasn't going to fight Rose. I didn't know how. But I wasn't going to disappear either. The humiliation came on a night when the compound gathered for a rank assessment, a monthly event where warriors demonstrated their advancement, and the alpha acknowledged shifts in hierarchy. I shouldn't have been there. I had no rank to assess, but Joyce had asked me to deliver supplies to the medical station set up at the edge of the training yard for injuries, and I'd stayed because the yard was full and the crowd was thick, and I'd thought I could watch from the shadows without being seen. I was wrong. Rose found me. Amy, she said my name loudly enough that the wolves near us turned. I didn't know Omegas attended assessments. Is there a new category? Defective? Laughter. Not much. Enough. I'm delivering supplies, I said. Of course you are. That's all you're good for, isn't it? Carrying things, following orders, being useful in the smallest possible way. She stepped closer. Her 2 flankers closed in behind me. The crowd was watching now, not all of it, but the wolves nearest to us. And in a pack this tight, that was enough to make it public. You know what I don't understand? Rose's voice carried the sweetness of a blade being drawn slowly. How someone with no wolf, no rank, and no value walks through this compound like she belongs here, like the alpha's protection means something. I don't think that. Then why are you still here? The question landed like a fist. Because she was asking what everyone was asking, what I asked myself every night. Why am I still here? What does he want? Why doesn't he say? I don't know, I said. Rose's smile widened. At least you're honest. Let me help you understand. She leaned close enough that her next words were just for me. He collects things, curiosities, broken tools he thinks he can fix. When he realizes you can't be fixed, you'll be thrown out with the rest of the waste, and no one. Her eyes glittered. Will remember you were here. She walked away. I stood at the edge of the training yard with Joyce's supply bag in my hands and told myself that the pressure behind my eyes was from the cold. 6 weeks in, and Nick saved someone's life. One of the junior wolf, I saw it. I was on the assessment platform reviewing Taran's notes on warrior advancement when I saw Rose intercept the Omega at the yard's edge. I couldn't hear the words. Didn't need to. Rose's body language was a textbook I'd been reading for years. The way she created audiences for her cruelty. The way she positioned herself so the target couldn't retreat without pushing through a crowd. I watched the Omega's face. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't lower her eyes. She just stood there and took it the way someone takes a beating when they've had so many that their body has stopped registering pain as meaningful information. And then she walked away, back straight, pace even, the runt trotting beside her. Taran followed my gaze. Want me to speak to Rose? No, she's going to escalate. She usually does. And you're going to let her? I set down the assessment notes. What I'm going to do, Taran, is run this pack, which is what I was doing when you interrupted me. He gave me the look. The one that said I've known you since we were 12, and I know when you're lying. I ignored it. But that night, in my quarters, I stood at the window that overlooked the lower east wing and watched the light in the Omega's room until it went out. The light went out at the same time every night early, before the rest of the compound, like she was rationing her existence, taking up as little space as possible, even in time. Something about that bothered me in ways I didn't have vocabulary for. I went to bed. I didn't sleep well. 6 weeks in, and Nick saved someone's life. One of the junior wolves, a pup, maybe 8 or 9 in human years, had wandered too close to the ravine behind the eastern wall. The ground gave way. He went over the edge and caught a root that held his weight, but not his grip. The pup screaming drew a crowd, but the ravine was steep, the edge unstable, and the ranked wolves who responded were too heavy to approach without risking another collapse. Nix heard the screaming from our room. I felt him leave my side, felt the absence like a missing heartbeat. By the time I reached the eastern wall, he was already halfway down the embankment, light enough not to trigger another slide, small enough to navigate the loose rock, his claws finding holds that no full-sized wolf could have used. He reached the boy, braced himself against the root, let the boy grab onto him, a boy twice his size clinging to a runt who weighed nothing, and held on until a warrior could lower a rope. The boy came up screaming and crying and alive. Nix came up shaking, his claws bloody, his body spent. I gathered him into my arms and pressed my face against his neck and breathed and breathed and breathed. The crowd was watching. I could feel them, but for once the silence around me didn't feel like contempt. It felt like recalculation. Alaric summoned me that evening. Not to the healer's quarters, not to the courtyard, to his study. I'd never been above the 3rd level. The staircase alone made my legs ache, not from exertion, from awareness. Every step higher felt like trespassing. His study was exactly what I expected. Stone walls, war maps, weapons mounted with the casualness of someone who used them regularly. A desk covered in documents, a fire that burned low and orange. He was standing at the window when I entered. He didn't turn. The pup, his voice, that voice. Low, controlled, with an undercurrent I couldn't read. He went down the ravine. Yes. He weighs 14 lb, the boy weighs 60. Yes. He shouldn't have been able to hold. No, Alaric turned then. The firelight cut his face in half, shadow and amber. He leaned against the windowsill and crossed his arms and looked at me with those gray eyes that gave nothing away and saw everything. Why? He said, that word again. His favorite question, a single syllable that demanded everything. I don't know why he held, I said. He just did. That's not what I'm asking. He stepped forward, 1 step. I'm asking why he went. He's a runt, sick, injured. He has no instinct for heroism. Runts are bred for survival, not sacrifice. So why did he hear a stranger screaming and run toward it? Because he's Nix, I said, and then before I could stop myself, he doesn't know he's supposed to be afraid. Alaric went still. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the compound, a door closed. Sit down, he said. I sat, not on the chair he gestured to. Instinct took me to the floor near the hearth, the way I'd always sat in Red Hollow. Low, small, below notice. I realized my mistake immediately. An alpha's study, a chair offered, and I'd chosen the floor. I started to stand. Stay. I stayed. He pulled the chair around and sat in it, not behind the desk, in front of me, close enough that his knees were level with my shoulders. Tell me about Red Hollow, he said. There's nothing to tell. Tell me anyway. I stared at the fire. Nix was downstairs sleeping in our room. I was alone with the most dangerous wolf in 4 territories, and he was asking me to talk about a past I'd spent years trying to forget. I was born packless, I said. My voice sounded wrong, thin, rusty, like a hinge that hadn't been used. My mother was an Omega who crossed into Red Hollow territory pregnant. They took her in because she had some healing knowledge. She died when I was 4. How? Fever. Pack couldn't afford a proper healer. I paused. Or wouldn't for an Omega. Go on. I was just there. No parents, no wolf. My shift never came in right. They tried to train it out of me when I was 12 for shifting. It didn't work, made it worse actually. After that I was classified as defective. I stopped. I never told anyone this. There'd never been anyone to tell. I spent the next 6 years being invisible. I cleaned, I cooked, I carried things. I stayed quiet and stayed small and hoped that if I was useful enough they'd keep me. They didn't. The new Alpha needed funds for a territory dispute. I was the most expendable asset. The word asset sat in the air between us. Alaric's jaw worked, a small, tight movement. The first uncontrolled reaction I'd ever seen from him. 60 silvers, he said. 60 silvers. Another silence, longer this time. Alaric leaned back in his chair and studied me, and I sat on his floor and let him because I'd already given him the worst of it, and there was nothing left to protect. You could have begged, he said. At the wreckage, when I found you, you could have begged for your life. I know, why didn't you? Because I didn't think my life was worth begging for. The words came out flat, true, and the moment I said them something changed in his face. Something beneath the stone and smoke, something fast and raw, and then it was gone. He stood. You eat alone in the dining hall. Yes. Starting tomorrow, your table is in the east section, Joyce's section. Why? He looked down at me. Because I said so. He left the room. I sat on his floor for 3 more minutes before my legs worked again. The table change was small, almost insignificant. A seat reassignment in a dining hall of 200 wolves, but an iron maw nothing was insignificant. The east section was where Joyce sat, where the healers and their staff ate. Mid-level, functional, not prestigious but respected. It was effectively a statement. This one serves a purpose. Rose noticed immediately. Alpha's rearranging furniture now? How romantic. But the whispers shifted. Not disappeared, shifted. The story changed from the Alpha's charity case to the healer's assistant. A role, a function, something the pack's logic could process. I sat in the east section and ate my meals and didn't look at the upper table where Alaric sat, or I tried not to look. I failed sometimes. Small things continued. A blanket appeared in my room. Thick, well-made, warm. No note, no explanation. Joyce denied sending it. The guard denied knowing about it. The corridor past my quarters, which had been unlit and cold, suddenly had torches installed overnight. When I asked the maintenance crew, they said it was scheduled. My food rations increased, not dramatically. An extra portion of meat, fresh bread instead of stale. When I asked Joyce, she snorted and said, I don't control the kitchen. Small things, anonymous things, things that could have been coincidence or bureaucracy or simple logistics. But I'd spent 18 years being invisible, and I knew what it looked like when someone was looking at you, even when they didn't want you to know. The second time I went to his study, he asked me about Nyx. He trusts you completely. He's all I have. That's not the same thing, I frowned. What do you mean? Alaric was at his desk this time, maps between us. The fire was higher. Someone had stoked it before I arrived. The chair was already positioned near the hearth. Dependency and trust are different mechanics, he said. A wolf can depend on someone it doesn't trust. Survival compels it. But the pup, he paused, choosing words like a man navigating a field of traps. He follows you by choice. He stays in a room with an open door. He went down a ravine for a stranger and then he came back to you. He looked at me. That isn't dependency, that's devotion. He's a pup, I said. He doesn't know what devotion means. Maybe that's why he's better at it. The fire crackled. I stared at Alaric. He stared at the map. Why do you keep asking me to come here? I said. I told you I want to understand. Understand what? He didn't answer for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to. Then he said, I have 400 wolves in this compound. Every single one of them operates on a system I understand. Rank, ambition, fear, loyalty bought with power. I can predict every wolf under my command, because every wolf under my command wants something. And what they want makes them readable. He looked at me. You don't want anything. Everyone wants something. Name it then. What do you want, Amy? My name. He said my name, not Omega, not defect, my name. I want to be left alone, I said. No, that's what you've learned to want because wanting anything else was too dangerous. I'm asking what you actually want. My chest tightened. The fire was too warm. The room was too small. His eyes were too gray and too steady and too close to something I couldn't afford to feel. My voice broke. I cleared my throat. I want to matter to one person for one reason that isn't usefulness. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Alaric looked away, toward the fire. His jaw was tight. His hands, which I'd never seen anything but steady, were gripping the edge of the desk. That's a dangerous want, he said. I know, for both of us. I didn't know what to do with that, with the word both, with the way his voice had dropped half a register, like the words were heavier than he'd intended. I should go, I said. Yes. I stood, walked to the door, my hand on the handle. Amy, I stopped. The blanket was mine. I left without turning around. I walked down 5 flights of stairs on legs that felt like water and sat on my cot and pulled that blanket around my shoulders and pressed my face against the fabric and didn't cry. But it was close. Rose escalated. I'd known she would. Joyce had said it. Tyron had predicted it. Even the compound walls seemed to brace for it. She came at me sideways, not physically, never physically. Rose's weapons were social, political, structural. She understood the pack's machinery, the way a saboteur understands a bridge. She knew exactly which bolts to loosen. She petitioned the Pack Council to review my placement. She argued that an unclaimed, unranked Omega without a wolf was a security vulnerability, a potential spy, a weakness in the compound structure. She cited precedent. She referenced pack law. She was infuriatingly not wrong. The review was scheduled for a Tuesday evening. Full council, open audience. She wants you humiliated, Joyce told me. She wants you standing in front of the pack with no defense, no rank, no claim, answering for your existence. I know, do you have a plan? No. Do you want one? I looked at Joyce. She was grinding herbs. She was always grinding herbs, but her hands had stopped. She was watching me with something that wasn't quite warmth, but was close enough to its cousin to make my throat tight. I don't know how to fight her, I said. You don't fight Rose, you survive her. There's a difference. The council chamber was full. Every ranked wolf in the compound, officers, warriors, seniors. 200 pairs of eyes in a room carved from stone with Alaric at the head of a long table and Rose standing at the chamber floor like a prosecutor who'd already won. I stood where they told me to stand, center floor below the table, below everyone, the lowest point in the room, a position designed for defendants. Nyx was at my feet. They'd tried to remove him at the door. He'd growled. They'd looked at Alaric. Alaric had said nothing, so Nyx stayed. Rose made her case. She was eloquent. She was precise. She was devastating. The Omega has no wolf, no rank, no clan ties, no combat capability. She occupies compound resources without contributing to pack security. Under Article 7 of the Irma Code, any individual who cannot justify their presence through rank, bond, or function may be subject to expulsion. She paused, looked at me with eyes that burned like amber coals. The Omega has been here for 7 weeks. She has formed no bonds. She serves no military function. She holds no rank. The only reason she is here, another pause, calibrated for maximum impact, is the Alpha's unexplained interest. An unexplained interest is not by our laws sufficient cause for placement. Murmurs, nods. The council members exchanged glances, not hostile toward me exactly, pragmatic. Iron Maw was built on pragmatism and Rose was speaking its language. Alaric was motionless at the head of the table, arms crossed, face unreadable. Rose turned to me. Does the Omega wish to speak in her defense? Every eye in the room on me. The pressure was crushing, not violent, not aggressive, just the sheer weight of relevance after a lifetime of irrelevance. Every instinct I had said, lower your eyes, bare your throat, accept the verdict. Old patterns, old survival. Nyx pressed against my ankle, his small body warm and steady. I opened my mouth and I said the truest thing I knew. I can't justify my presence. Rose is right. By your laws, by your code, by every metric this pack values, I don't belong here. The murmurs died. The room went still. I have no wolf, I have no rank, I have no combat value. I can't shift, I can't fight. I am by every definition you use defective. I swallowed. My hands were shaking. I laced them together behind my back so no one could see. But 6 weeks ago, a wolf pup who weighs 14 lb held a boy twice his size on the edge of a ravine because he heard screaming and moved toward it. Not because he was trained, not because he was ordered, because something in him decided that a stranger's life was worth risking his own. I looked at Nyx. He looked up at me, his tail twitched. He is a runt. He will never fight in your battles or hold your territory or climb your ranks. By your metrics, he is worthless. I looked up at the council, but he was the only one who moved. Silence. I'm not asking to stay because I deserve to. I'm asking because I know what it's like to be measured by systems that were never built to count you. And I know that some things my voice cracked, I let it. Some things that matter most don't show up on the ledger. I stopped talking. My pulse was thunder in my ears. The room was silent for 5 seconds. 10:15. Rose opened her mouth to respond. Denied. Alaric's voice cut through the chamber like a blade through cloth. Every head turned to him. He hadn't moved, hadn't uncrossed his arms, but his eyes, those gray, ash-colored eyes, were locked on Rose with an intensity that made the air feel thin. The petition is denied. Rose's composure cracked, just for an instant, just a flicker of fury behind the polished facade. Alpha, the code clearly states. The code states that justification can come through rank, bond, or function. Alaric stood. The room shifted, everyone drawing back an inch, an unconscious response to his authority. The Omega serves the healer's quarters. Function established, petition denied. The healer's position is informal and petition denied. He didn't raise his voice, he lowered it, which was worse. Move to the next item. Rose stared at him. The fury was fully visible now, a flash of it, hot and bright before her mask slid back into place. Of course, Alpha. She sat down. I stood on the council chamber floor with my heart slamming against my ribs and my hands shaking behind my back and Nyx's warm body pressed against my ankle. And I looked at Alaric. He didn't look back. But as the council moved to the next item and the room's attention shifted, his hand, resting on the table, hidden from most of the room, uncurled. And I saw it. His fingers were trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my cot with Alaric's blanket around my shoulders and Nyx curled against my chest, and replayed the council session in my head until the words lost meaning and became just shapes, sounds, and silences, and the trembling of his fingers on a stone table. He defended me publicly. In front of his entire rank structure, he'd shut down a legitimate challenge from his beta-ranked advisor and offered a justification so thin it was practically transparent. Everyone in that room knew it. Everyone would talk about it. By morning, the compound would be buzzing with new speculation, new theories, new whispers, and I still didn't know why the blanket was mine. That's a dangerous want for both of us. Petition denied. I pressed my face against Nyx's fur and tried to breathe normally and couldn't. I avoided him for 4 days. Not obviously. You can't obviously avoid someone when you're a bottom-tier Omega, and they're the alpha of the largest military pack in 4 territories. But I adjusted my routines, ate earlier, used secondary corridors, spent more time in the healer's quarters, and less time in open spaces where I might turn a corner and walk into a wall of smoke-gray eyes and unanswered questions. It didn't work. On the 4th day, Joyce looked at me over her mortar and pestle and said, "If you reorganize that shelf one more time, I'm going to assume you've lost your mind." I'm being thorough. You're hiding. I'm not hiding. You've alphabetized the bandages. I looked at the shelf. She was right. I had alphabetized the bandages. He's not going to hurt you, Joyce said. Her voice had shifted, softer, which for Joyce meant it had gone from sandpaper to rough cloth. In 30 years of serving this pack, I've seen 5 alphas come and go. Alaric is the coldest, the most controlled, and the most dangerous. He's also the only one who's never punished someone for being weak. She paused. He doesn't understand weakness, but he doesn't hate it either. He just doesn't know what to do with it. What do you think he's doing with me? Joyce set down her pestle. I think he found something that broke every rule he'd built his world on, and he's trying to figure out whether to change the rules or destroy the thing. My chest went cold. Which will he choose? I don't know, but I'll tell you this, I've never seen his hand shake before. He found me on the 5th day. I was outside the compound walls at the stream that ran along the eastern boundary. I discovered it 2 weeks ago, a quiet spot, sheltered by trees, far enough from the compound that the noise faded to nothing. I came here when the walls felt too close. Nyx was waiting in the shallows, snapping at minnows, missing every single one. I heard Alaric before I saw him, not his footsteps. He moved like smoke, but the quality of the silence changed. The birds stopped singing. The trees stopped creaking. Even the stream seemed to quiet. I didn't turn around. You've been avoiding me, he said. Yes. Why? Because I'm afraid. I felt him step closer, not touching close. Alaric close, which was the specific distance I'd become attuned to, near enough to feel his presence, far enough to maintain the pretense of separation. Afraid of what? Of what it means that you defended me. Of what it means that your hands were shaking. Of what happens when I stop being a curiosity and start being a problem. Silence long. The stream kept moving. Nyx caught a minnow, fumbled it, and sneezed. Look at me, Alaric said. I turned. He was standing 3 FT away, no armor, no officers, no title in his posture, just a man, tall and broad and terrifying, with gray eyes that were, for the first time since I'd known him, not calculating. They were uncertain. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. I stared at him. I have built everything in my life on systems, on control, on understanding the mechanics of power and leverage and strategy. I know how packs work. I know how wolves work. I know how wars work. I have never, he stopped. Jaw tight, started again. I have never encountered something I couldn't analyze, something that didn't follow a logic I could map. I'm not that complicated, I said. You are the most complicated thing I've ever seen. His voice was raw in a way I'd never heard. You sat on my floor. You chose the floor, Amy. An alpha offers you a chair and you choose the floor. Not out of submission, not out of strategy, out of habit. Because you've spent so long believing you belong below everyone that you don't even question it anymore. I said nothing. My throat was closed. And then you stood in my council chamber and told 200 wolves that the most valuable thing in this compound is a 14 LB runt who can't fight and can't shift and can't do anything except stay. He is, I whispered. I know. His voice broke on the word. Just slightly, just enough. I know he is, and that's the problem. Because I've spent 12 years building a pack on the principle that value is measured in strength, and then you walked in with a broken wolf and no rank and no power, and you made me question every single metric I've ever used. The stream ran. The trees stood. The world held its breath. I can't be what you need, I said. I'm nothing. The word was sharp enough to cut. He stepped forward 1 step, closing the distance from 3 FT to 2. And something in his expression made my chest implode. Don't call yourself nothing, not to me, not. He stopped himself, pulled back, physically stepped back like proximity was a cliff edge, and he just looked down. He turned away, ran his hand over his jaw. The gesture was so human, so un-alpha that it hurt to watch. I don't know how to do this, he said, quieter now. I don't have a framework, I don't have a precedent. Everything I know about power says that what I'm feeling is a vulnerability, and vulnerabilities get people killed. What are you feeling? I said. He didn't answer. Alaric. He turned back. His gray eyes met mine, and for one second, one raw, unguarded, devastating second, I saw it. Not curiosity, not calculation, not the cold, controlled assessment of an alpha evaluating an asset. He was looking at me the way the pup had looked at me in the cage. Like I was the only thing in the world worth staying for. Then the mask came back, the walls rebuilt, the alpha returned. Go back to the compound, he said. His voice was steady again. Controlled. Wrong, it's getting dark. He walked away. I sat by the stream and shook. Rose struck again 3 days later. This time she didn't use politics. She used something worse. She used me. The compound was hosting a delegation from a neighboring pack, the Stoneridge, a mid-tier alliance that Alaric was courting for a territorial buffer. Formal dinner, full ceremony. The kind of event where appearances were currency and protocol was armor. I wasn't invited, obviously. I was planning to eat in the healer's quarters as far from the formal hall as possible. But when I arrived at Joyce's, I found a dress laid out on the table, simple, dark gray, well-made. What is this? Joyce didn't look up from her herbs. The Alpha's orders, you're attending the dinner. I can't attend the dinner. Take it up with him. I stared at the dress. Joyce, I can't walk into a formal hall full of ranked wolves and a foreign delegation. I'm an Omega. You'll do what you're told, which is what all of us do, including me, including Taran, including Rose. The Alpha said attend, you attend. I attended. The dress fit. I didn't want to think about how he knew my size. Joyce braided my hair, roughly the way she did everything but effectively. Nix was left in our quarters. For the first time in weeks, I walked through the compound without him. The formal hall was massive, stone and timber and firelight, packed with ranked wolves in ceremonial dress and the Stoneridge delegation, a dozen stern-faced warriors and their alpha, a gray-bearded man with sharp eyes. Every head turned when I entered. Not because I was beautiful. I wasn't, not in any way that mattered here. Because I was the anomaly, the defect in the machine, the question mark that nobody had answered yet. Rose was across the hall. She saw me and smiled. The smile should have warned me. The dinner proceeded. I sat at the end of the east table, Joyce's section, my section, as far from the head table as protocol allowed. I kept my head down and ate slowly and tried to become part of the furniture. It worked until the toast. The Stoneridge Alpha stood, raised his goblet, offered formal words about alliance and territory and mutual strength. Alaric stood to respond, and Rose chose that moment. Forgive me, Alpha Alaric, she said, standing from her seat at the officer's table. Her voice carried beautifully, trained, calibrated, designed for exactly this kind of moment. Before the toast, I believe protocol requires clarity on one matter. The hall went quiet. The delegation may have noticed an unusual presence at tonight's gathering. She gestured toward me. Every eye followed her hand. For the record, this is Amy, an Omega, unranked, unbonded, wolfless. She was brought here from a destroyed convoy 7 weeks ago. Rose's smile was radiant. I mention this only because the Stoneridge delegation deserves transparency. We would not want them to misunderstand the nature of her presence. The implication was surgical. In front of a foreign delegation, in the middle of a diplomatic dinner, Rose had just called me the Alphas without using the word. The Stoneridge Alpha's eyebrows rose. His delegation exchanged glances. The hall murmured. Alaric stood motionless at the head of the table. I felt the room pressing in, the stares, the whispers, the weight of every wolf in the hall deciding what I was. My hands were trembling under the table. My face was hot. My throat was closing. And then I felt it, the familiar pull of old gravity, the downward drag of 20 years of being invisible, being nothing, being the thing that everyone agreed didn't matter. Lower your eyes, bare your throat, disappear. I closed my eyes and I thought about Nix standing over me in a cage, growling at an army with a throat too small to hold the sound. I opened my eyes, I stood up. The hall went dead silent. My name is Amy, I said. My voice was thin, but it held. I was sold by my pack for 60 silvers. I was abandoned in a convoy attack. I was found by Alpha Alaric and brought here. I looked at Rose. She was watching me with the satisfied expression of someone who'd lit a fire and was enjoying the show. I am not the Alpha's, I am not his pet. I am not his charity. My voice steadied. I am a healer's assistant. I serve this compound in the capacity I was assigned, and if my presence offends anyone, I looked at Alaric. His gray eyes locked onto mine, and in them I saw something that I had never in my entire life seen directed at me, pride. Then they can take it up with me. I sat down. The silence lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. Then the Stoneridge Alpha laughed. Not mockingly, genuinely. A short, gruff bark of a laugh. Well, Alaric, he said, your people have spine, I'll give you that. The tension broke. Not entirely, the hall was still buzzing, still processing, but the immediate crisis deflated like a punctured lung. Rose sat down. Her expression hadn't changed, but her eyes had. The satisfaction was gone. In its place was something cold and hard and calculating. She'd expected me to crumble. I hadn't crumbled, and she would never forgive me for it. I found her in the corridor after dinner. She was leaning against the wall, hands pressed flat against the stone, breathing in a way that told me she was 3 seconds from falling apart. Amy, she didn't look up. Please don't what? Be kind to me right now. I can't, her breath hitched. I'll brick if you're kind to me right now. I stood there 2 ft away, my hands at my sides. Every instinct I had, every trained response, every protocol, every wall I'd built told me to maintain distance, control the situation, process it as a political event, and respond strategically. But she was shaking, and her voice had said please like it was the last word she had left. I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, small, trembling. They curled around mine with a grip that shouldn't have been strong but was. Strong in the way that desperate things are strong. Strong in the way that drowning people grip the thing that keeps them above water. I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. We stood in a dark corridor in my compound, holding hands like 2 people standing at the edge of something neither of us had a name for. And then she let go. She pulled her hand back, wiped her eyes with her sleeve, straightened her spine, and looked at me. Thank you, she said, for the dress, for the dinner, for she paused. For all of it. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do, because no one else has ever given me anything worth thanking them for. She walked away down the corridor, around the corner. I stood there with my hands still warm from hers and felt something crack inside me. Not break, not shatter, crack. The way foundation stone cracks when the ground shifts beneath it. I went to my quarters, sat at my desk, stared at maps I couldn't see. I was in trouble. I was in deep, unfixable, unprecedented trouble, and I had no strategy for it at all. 3 weeks after the dinner, I woke up in the middle of the night to Nick's whimpering. Not the soft, dreaming whimpers he sometimes made while he slept. Real whimpers, pain sounds. His body was curled tight, his muscles rigid, his breathing ragged and wrong. I sat up and pulled him into my lap. He was burning. The fever was back, worse than before, hotter, deeper. His eyes were glazed and his heartbeat was racing, and his small body was shaking so hard it vibrated against my chest. No, I whispered. No. I was running before I finished the word. Down the corridor barefoot in my sleep shift, carrying a 14 lb wolf pup who was dying in my arms. Joyce's quarters. I pounded on the door. She opened it in seconds. Joyce slept like a soldier, dressed and ready. She took one look at Nix and her face changed. Bring him in. She worked for an hour. Herbs, compresses, tonics, things I couldn't name and couldn't follow. I knelt on the floor and held Nick's paw and watched his breathing get shallower and felt the world narrowing to a point. This room, this pup, this moment. It's the runt condition, Joyce said, her voice clipped, professional, controlled in the way people get controlled when the truth is bad. His body never fully integrated the shift. The wolf and the human are fighting each other instead of merging. It causes periodic system failures, fevers, organ stress, collapse. Can you fix it? I can manage it tonight, but it will happen again, and each time it happens, it'll be worse. How many times? Joyce looked at me. Amy, how many times? She held my gaze. I don't know, but not many. The floor dropped out from under me, not physically. I was still kneeling, still holding his paw, but something inside me collapsed. Some load-bearing wall that I hadn't known I was using to hold myself up. I bent over Nix and pressed my forehead against his. His fur was damp. His breathing was shallow. His heart, that small, stupid, brave heart, was racing. Stay, I whispered. Stay. He made it through the night. By morning, the fever had broken. He was weak, barely conscious, but alive. Joyce set up a cot in the healer's quarters so I could stay with him. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor beside his cot and held his paw and watched his chest rise and fall and made deals with the universe I didn't believe in. That's where Alaric found me. I don't know what time it was. I don't know how long he'd been standing in the doorway. I only knew he was there because Joyce's voice said, "She hasn't eaten, hasn't slept, she won't leave him." "Leave us," Alaric said. Joyce left. He crossed the room, knelt beside me on the floor. The alpha of the iron mob pack on his knees on a healer's stone floor. "Joyce told me what happened," he said. "He's going to die." My voice was flat, empty. The kind of empty that comes after you've used up every emotion and there's nothing left. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but eventually. His body can't sustain the half shift. He's fighting himself and he's losing. We'll get other healers, specialists. You can't fix this. I looked at him. He's a runt, Alaric. He was born wrong. He was never supposed to survive. Everything about him, every day, every moment is borrowed time. Alaric's jaw worked. His hands, those large, powerful, weapon-trained hands, were gripping his own knees. But he chose to stay, I said. In the cage when everyone ran, he couldn't fight. He couldn't shift. He couldn't do anything except stand there and growl, and he did it anyway because my voice fractured. Because something in him decided I was worth dying for. And I don't understand how something so small and so broken can love that completely when every full-grown, fully shifted wolf in that convoy ran. Tears. Finally, after weeks of holding them, they came. Silent, steady, devastating, rolling down my face and landing on Nick's fur. "You asked me once why the pup stayed," I said. I said it was because nobody told him he was supposed to leave. I remember, that was wrong, that wasn't the reason. Then what is? He stayed because love doesn't care about the odds. The room was quiet. Nick's breathing was the only sound, shallow, steady, alive. Alaric reached out. He put his hand on top of mine, the one holding Nick's paw. His palm was warm, rough. It covered my entire hand, and his fingers curled around mine with a gentleness.